Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, this we got a little class over there today. I know a lot of folks are going for showers and so forth. All right, well. Well, I know Roxana is, I should say Roxana, her Anna, I think, is having a baby shower. I think. I know, so they know that group of Eckhoffs is gone. I know the other group of the Helens is gone for something. I just don't remember what. But they're having Alice play. Oh, there come the rest. I was going to say that's going to be hard to control with a bunch of, as riveting as I'm sure my kids will find this Bible study. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, help us, like Daniel, to always trust in your providence, your care, your compassion, to look to you in times of trouble and in times of plenty, knowing that you are the source and the end of all things. Let us therefore never fear any power on earth or in heaven, knowing that you are over all things. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, today we'll finish up pretty quickly the first chapter of Daniel, only because there isn't that much more to say about the rest of Daniel. I think we were on the very last slide on our sheet. I don't know if you have those with you. It's not a big deal. But let's just read, I think, verses 18 through 21. I believe that's where we were. Just as a quick recap while you're looking for that. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah. He made them kind of a vassal state as a buffer between him and Egypt, and he took a lot of the articles from the temple, and he took also several hostages, but not in the sense we think of as hostages. He took members of their royal families and aristocracy, and it's the best and the brightest, and apparently the best looking, and made them go through a 3-year regimen. You may remember the thing that was going on in Daniel chapter 1 is the king wanted them to eat this food from his own table, the best of the best, to make them the best of the best. This food was not necessarily going to sit well with the dietary restrictions of the Jewish Old Testament law at this time. It's the only testament. And so Daniel and his friends made a suggestion, give us 10 days on vegetables, and just see who comes. If we're not looking well, fine, we'll change back. But if not, let us continue this. And so the guy in charge of them says, okay, we can live with 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, they look healthier than everybody else. This is a good lesson. Like we said, always take every little description in the Bible as a prescription for you. Eat only vegetables. That is not true. Don't. I mean, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, except that you were missing out on some of the best food in the world. Celery and bananas.
Do you suppose they went through the rest of their time there just eating vegetables?
I would imagine so, yes. I would imagine so, because I think that was part of their meal. That, I suppose you might say, it's the meal plan they were offered at this particular university. And so if you were going to be on the cafeteria, you had to eat what you were eating. All right, so verses 18, or did I say 17? I don't remember. 18 through 21.
At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Shael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus.
All right. So first of all, let's just very briefly summarize what goes on. So they finished their time, and apparently this is just how it was supposed to be. At the end of their training, they were supposed to come into the king. I assume, even though it doesn't say it in so many words, I assume this was kind of like a public test to see, okay, are you going to be able to work here or not after the end of this? And if it was a test, how did this go for Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? went really well. Not only were they doing okay, they weren't just on the honor roll, they were the head of the class. 10 times better, not only than just the other people in their classes, but then all of the standing wise men, all of the magicians and enchanters. So they are clearly the best. As we'll see, this means that they are respected, they are given authority, they are given the trust of the king in a lot of ways. And this will serve them well in the future, and it will inevitably serve the people of Israel very well in the future. Just like, again, to make a comparison that will frequently be made, Joseph in the book of Genesis, when he gets put into Pharaoh's service, this, of course, is very good for Joseph, right? But is it mainly just that it's good for Joseph? No, through Joseph, who else gets saved? His family, and therefore the entire line of the Messianic promise. So likewise, this will be the way that God preserves, blesses, and keeps his remnants, his righteous, believing people, all the way through this captivity. And by the way, notice Daniel, he apparently lives a long time. Nebuchadnezzar reigns for something like 40 years. And this is his first year when he does this. He literally became king and then immediately went to Judah and attacked it, more or less. So it was one of his first acts of king as his first year. He lives for 40 years, he dies. There's several kings who live after him. Cyrus finally comes after like 4 different kings. And he lives all the way through this to the reign of King Cyrus, who ultimately lets the people go. In other words, however old he happens to be, and he has to be young because he lives another 70 years at least. Because that's when King Cyrus comes, is 70 years later, to let the people of Israel go back home. So he lives to be a very old man. Now I will, just as a quick introduction to the next chapter, because the next chapter starts with a very strange sounding thing if you think about it. It says, in the 2nd year of his reign, this dream happens. So this is just to say, this is very likely during the time of the training. And this is almost why, at the end, it's easy for Nebuchadnezzar to say he is 10 times better. They are 10 times better than all of the others, because even during their training period, they're able to do what we're about to read about. Okay? And the Bible does this often, by the way. It does, especially the book of Daniel, as we'll see as we go through. It's not like our normal, simple stories where you go, here's the beginning, here's the next thing, the middle, the end. It doesn't go in that necessary progression. It's more like, I suppose, you see those movies where they start with a little bit of their life and then they do a flashback. There's a lot of those kinds of things going on in Daniel. This is one of those flashbacks. All right. That being said, any questions before we dive in officially about Daniel or about what we just read? Anyone there? We're ready to go? Awesome sauce. Chapter 2. Let's read verse 1 through 3.
In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means.
All right. So, we won't spend a lot of time on this. We'll just say, so what's happening here? Sum it up in your own words. Okay, he had a dream. Good dreams? Bad dreams? Yeah, they're definitely troubling dreams. They're not, these are the things that are now keeping him up. By the way, it's worth just saying something about dreams because, well, I assume we all have dreams, right? Sometimes we wonder if they're significant, don't we? There are probably a lot of them, it doesn't even cross your mind that it's significant. If every dream of mine had some kind of special significance for the future, I would be terrified about the future because my dreams, ask my wife, they are nuts. I mean, they make no sense whatsoever. Most often, of course, dreams, who knows? Scientists don't know what they really are all about. They have theories about it being a thing of random firings from the brain as it processes the day's information. Whatever we want to say about what we think dreams are or are not, by and large, most dreams are not really significant in the sense that they're giving some kind of divinely guided insight into life or the future. But some dreams are. It happens here. For instance, is there another place in the Bible you can think of where dreams prove to be significant? I'll give you a hint. This guy named Joseph. This could be two hints, actually, two different stories.
Oh, where the sheaves found down.
Okay, right, okay. Yeah, Joseph, there were a lot of dreams involved around Joseph. You may remember before he got shipped off to Egypt, he had several dreams showing how his brothers and his father and his mother would all bow down to him. Didn't make them fans of Joseph, by the way. Didn't make the dreams any less true, but turns out that would be. Of course, you might remember in connection with Pharaoh or Joseph what happened after he was in Egypt. Pharaoh had a dream. And it was that dream and Joseph interpreting that dream that elevated Joseph to the highest part of Judah or of Egypt, where he was able to predict that there would be 7 great years of crops, 7 terrible years. And Pharaoh said, "Clearly you're wise. You be in charge." There's another Joseph that's worth mentioning. Mary. Exactly. I'm only, by the way, if I restate what you're saying, it's not because I'm thinking you've said it incorrectly or not right enough. It's mainly so the people at the other church can hear. So yeah, Joseph had a dream that, on the one hand, allowed him to know Mary was good to marry. She didn't cheat on him. And then on the other hand, that it's time to run away to Egypt because Herod is going to kill him. So God does sometimes give dreams to some people. This is not licensed to say, okay, I'm going to keep a dream journal and try to figure out what God is telling me on any given night. I assume that if you have a dream that you think might be God letting you know something, some kind of sign, first of all, you'll have a very strong inkling from God that this is how it is. And one way or the other, this is always the big thing. Whenever you think God is giving you any kind of statement or indication, does it line up with the scriptures? If it doesn't, you are wrong. God is not giving you a vision here. Something else going on.
And he'll confirm it a lot of times.
One would assume, yes, as he did with these. And in fact, we'll see, Daniel had, the king Nebuchadnezzar will know that this dream was both given by God and that Daniel knew what it was because, or knew what it really meant for reasons that will become obvious. All right, good enough. So who does he summon, by the way, to help him out with this mess? Sorcerers, magicians, enchanters, and astrologers. All the people I would go to if I had a problem. Now, these days, of course, most people, although there is a growing number of people who will not shake their head at the idea of fortune tellers, magicians, astrologers, and so forth, we have a very, very large and growing group of the population who is resurrecting all of these things. But by and large, we all kind of laugh at fortune tellers. Now, back in those days, it's worth bearing in mind, this was very serious stuff back then. I mean, this was stuff you studied. In my theory. We talked about astrology a little last time. By the way, when they say enchanters, magicians, and so forth, it's good to be clear about what they meant versus what we mean. Because when we think that, we probably think something like stage magicians who are doing magic tricks, or something like Harry Potter, Merlin, and casting spells and these big magical things. While there were things like, say, the Pharaoh magicians who were able by their dark arts to do some amazing things, almost certainly by the power of the devil. By the way, it is true. There are such things as supernatural powers of darkness, and they are capable of doing things that exceed the limits of our normal experience. And so, to a certain degree, and in fact, we see this in the New Testament in Acts several times, where the apostles come up against magicians who are wowing the crowds with things that are amazing, but who always say, wow, you apostles are the real deal here. But point being, that's only a small part. The bigger part of the idea of magic back in the day is you're in this idea where there are just supernatural forces all around you. There are multiple gods, probably all kinds of lesser spirits moving around. And so how do you cope with the reality of that world? Well, magic was a way of, you might almost say, something like a science, but not science, right? But where you, through what they believed were time-tested methods, that they would do certain acts that seemed to yield reliably certain results. And the idea was, well, we can manipulate these forces by doing the proper protocols, offering the right sacrifices at the right time, doing certain rituals at the right time. We can move the gods or the spiritual forces to act in a certain way. So magic wasn't about like casting spells in that Harry Potter way, but doing things that they believed would motivate supernatural forces to act in one way rather than another. And precisely because you weren't in control of the supernatural forces, it wasn't a big surprise if it didn't always work out. Because the relevant god or the relevant supernatural force might listen, might be inclined, but in the same way as I might go and make a case to Karen to do something she might really not necessarily like to do, maybe I'll have success, maybe not. But that's magic. It's trying to manipulate the spiritual forces to have one outcome rather than others. This was big business, and the king took them seriously, and so did everyone else. So he's hoping that they'll be able to interpret the dream. That's part of the job description. If you are a wise man, and by the way, we'll see these are collectively referred to later as wise men. And I point this out because in the New Testament, who comes and worships Jesus? And do you know what those wise men's occupation almost certainly was? Yeah, magicians, astrologer, enchanter, something like that. Okay. So let's see how this goes. I got a dream. It's troubling me. You're the experts. Tell me what's going on. Verses 4 through, well, let's just read verse 4 really quickly, and then we'll move on to the very interesting thing the king decides to say.
Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it.
Reasonable, right? All right, king. We'll see what we can do. Tell me what the dream is, and I will tell you what to do. That's what Pharaoh did. Just to tell me the dream. Okay, here it is. Let's see how reasonable our king is. Verse 5, and we'll just read all the way down to 11.
If you don't and your house is turned into a pile of rubble, if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. Moses answered the king, there is not a man on earth who can do what the king has. Never asked such a thing. What the king asks is difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among them.
All right. So this obviously goes south faster than a Trump-Zelensky meeting. The king's very reasonable reply to the very reasonable request is what?
Wait.
More or less, you're dead. But no, yeah, he says, I'm not going to tell you the dream. You tell me the dream, and then interpret it to me, and that way, I'll know you're not just telling me what you think I want to hear, or you're just making stuff up, because how am I supposed to know what you tell me the interpretation is true? And by the way, notice there is some, it's actually on the face, in its essence, a reasonable request. Because how would you have any idea whether their interpretation is accurate or not? It's a dream. All they have to come up and say, well, I guess that sounds like this, and that seems reasonable. Maybe, but if they can tell you what the dream is, how could you possibly doubt their interpretation? What's that?
That was smart on his part.
It's smart on his part, but from his perspective, it makes sense. Now, from the astrologer's perspective, it would be like walking to the doctor and he says, so, what's wrong with you today? Doc, I don't want you to run any tests. I don't want you to do anything. I don't want to tell me what's wrong with me, and then I'll trust that you can treat me. As they say, and the astrologers are absolutely right about this, no human being can do that for you. And no one's ever asked for that because everyone knows it is not possible for a human being to look into the head of another human being and know what they dreamt. It's just not something humans are capable of. They say only the gods could do this. Now, aside from the fact that they're putting a plural on God, they are right about this. Only God could possibly give the king what he's asking for. As we'll see, it's exactly God who gives the king what he's asking. But I love the motivation he gives. You do this, you will be so richly rewarded. You don't, I'm going to cut you into pieces. I'm going to tear down your house, and no one will ever hear of you again. It's not even, I'm going to fire you because you're worthless, obviously. I will destroy you, your family, and everything you love. You cannot say that King Nebuchadnezzar does not mean business. All right. Understandably, they're distraught. And they try to reason with him again, saying how unreasonable this is, how they could help him if it would help him. Let's see how the king reacts to their plea. This is beyond anyone. Verse 12 and 13.
This man became so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death.
All right. So things go from bad to worse. I mean, we know what he's about to do. He's not just angry at these particular wise men now. And there's a certain sense where you can see that Nebuchadnezzar also has a skeptical bent to him, where he just assumes, if these people are worthless, the ones who serve me, who I call for my special needs, then clearly all of them are worthless. They are all charlatans. They are all deceivers. Better to get rid of them and rid the kingdom of deceivers and charlatans. And again, even though it's kind of a fit of rage kind of thing, you could see the reasonableness of what he's saying. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's the most rational possible response. I'm just saying from his perspective, you can see that idea. All of you types are clearly liars. You are all just trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And you are a blight, therefore, to the kingdom, because you build up your profession on lying, on manipulating, on trying apparently to work things your way and lead kings into error. So it says, let's cut the whole tree down. And notice, it's not even just the ones who are actively serving as wise men. Who else is going to fall under this, let's kill them all? Daniel and friends. And like we just talked about, what are Daniel and friends doing right now? This is the second year of his reign. How long was their training regimen? 3 years. So even the students from all of, and by the way, notice how risky of a maneuver that is. This is how serious Nebuchadnezzar is, because where did these people come from, Daniel and his friends? They came from Judah. But were they just like, let's go search the streets for really smart-looking peasants? Royal family and aristocracy. And by the way, this is not the only kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar has demanded this from. These are just a handful of Jews from all of these other kingdoms that Nebuchadnezzar has conquered and taken members of the royal family and the aristocracy. How do you think these various countries would respond, knowing that now, all of a sudden, Nebuchadnezzar is executing their families? This could foment a huge rebellion. And yet Nebuchadnezzar is so firmly dedicated to this, apparently he doesn't care. He's going to do this. That also says something about his confidence in his power.
I
But
don't see how that lines up with,
Oh,
he picked them from royalty and aristocrats. So why does that make them wise? Just because they were,
no, it's not just that they were, that it doesn't make, notice they have to go through this 3-year training regimen and then get examined to see if they'll fit the bill. It's also under this understanding too, why do people get raised up into positions and families of power? This is a very different way of American thinking, where it's, in theory, strict individual meritocracy. You can go from rags to riches by your dint of self-will, motivation, grit, and happen to be well endowed intellectually and in other ways. The reason the nobles became nobles, especially in those days, were 2 big reasons. First, you were favored by the gods. This is self-described. It is, why were the kings of Judah the kings of Judah? God raised David up and apparently blessed his sons for the same. Now, God chooses your family as somehow uniquely well suited to this. One can assume these probably are better people by and large than other people. On the other hand, how do you maintain power over generations? Is it, I just was born in this family, and so everyone will, of course, respect me? No, it's because you actually, on the one hand, you have the benefit of being able to be educated well and trained up in a certain way, but you are effective. You do not maintain a kingdom long if you are ineffective. These people are in power because they are worthy of the power. And they're worthy of the power by dint of their charisma, their ability to get people lead, their dint of military wisdom, because that is what a king was. He was the leader of the militaries too. By dint of a supernatural assumption of divine favor, and by dint of just being smart enough to deal with all of the problems that arose. If you didn't, well, like so many other kings who are narrated after the Great Assyrian Empire, it collapsed because their kings were worthless after that. The Babylonian Empire will soon collapse because the kings after Nebuchadnezzar are really ineffective. So that's why they go to the royal families. This dynasty has been in power for a long time now. They have to be effective, and that's true of all the surrounding kingdoms too. Does that make sense? This is why people would submit to nobility all the way up to the medieval ages. Yes, there were bad, stupid nobles. They crumbled. The good ones rose to the top. Not good, not in the sense necessarily they were fair, right, and moral, but in the sense that they were effective at what they did.
So the fear figured into it.
Well, fear, yes. Fear definitely figured into it. But you could make the reasonable assumption that a noble would be a better, wiser, more effective person in advising than a peasant. For all kinds of reasons. Does that help? Okay. Genuinely. Okay, somebody want to read, then we'll move on how Daniel and his friends and everybody responds, or Daniel and his friends respond. This 14 will go all the way up to 22:3.
When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and disposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. And light dwells with him.
Oh, boy, yeah, wait for this praise.
I name and praise you, God, my Father. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we have. You have made known to us the dream of
There's a fair bit to unpack there, and we're probably going to stop after unpacking it, because then we're going to get to the meat of this, which is the dream, and that'll take a little bit to talk about. First, I'll just ask, anything that jumps out to you about this as we read through it?
Praise God.
What's that?
The
The first thing you do is not, okay, let's sit down and think, boy, what would the king likely be dreaming about? What's he been up to lately? In other words, they don't start relying back on their own wisdom. What do? They pray immediately to God. And first of all, I'll note this is a very different response than the wise men of Babylon. Because what do they say? They immediately assume, I'm not capable of this, therefore there is no way this can get done. Daniel and his friends' response is, I'm not capable of this, therefore, of course, there is one who is, and he actually is willing to listen to us. The wise men kind of give up all hope in their own wisdom and their own magics, their own enchantments, their own astrologies, and apparently their own gods. They just despair immediately that this is going to help them. Which kind of shows how shaky their own faith in their own gods already is. Probably as a consequence of what they actually believe. That everything they do has proven to them, relatively at least, uncertain. Whereas Daniel and his friends are just certain God is capable of this. Now, they don't know for a fact that God will do this. But they are certain that God is capable of it, and that he is willing to hear and to help his people. And so they respond in prayer. By the way, this is something, of course, every Christian should do. We always are tempted to go right to our own resources and see whether we believe we have the talents, the skills, the drive, the whatever, to overcome whatever challenge we are facing. Now, of course, God is the one who gives us all these talents. And by the way, something I didn't mention back in chapter 1, it says in verse 17, to the 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding and all kinds of literature and learning. That's even what we would think of as their intellectual talents was a gift of God. Same with everyone, by the way. The reason anyone has resources they can rely on is because God planted those resources in them. The reason there is coal in that mountain and not another is God put coal in that mountain and not that one. The reason somebody has strength, another has intellect, another has good looks, and sometimes it's all combined in one person, God gives them these things. But that being said, they don't immediately turn to those resources, they immediately turn to God. And granted, it's a daunting task. There's no way, they know off the bat, there's nothing in our own resources, God-given though they may be, that could help us with this. We need to go directly to the source. But notice throughout the Old Testament, and certainly here, it's not as though Daniel, as we'll see later especially, has the mentality, first I'll try everything I can do. And if that fails, then I'll pray to God. All too often, I think we're tempted to act that way. It's not that we don't believe that God hears prayer or that he doesn't help us. It's that we believe, first of all, we should try everything we can, and whether we don't want to bother God with it, or whether, honestly, we don't trust that we need God until we need him. Either way, we show a lack of confidence that God is capable of dealing with our problems and is willing to hear us. And by the way, is the source of any possible resolution. Even the ones that come, as far as we can see, from our own resources. This is why prayer is not the last resort when all of your efforts have failed. It is the first resort as you ask God, yes, to bless you as you persist with your efforts, acknowledging he is the source of your ability to work and to know and to do anything. But know that however the resolution comes, he is the one who gives it. Prayer is a first, not a last resort. All right, anything else that's worth pointing out here?
Even in verse 14 there, it says, God had already kind of blessed Daniel with, but instead he spoke with wisdom and tact.
Oh, sure, sure.
You know, so Daniel already had been relying on God for business. And now it's making use of that.
Exactly. Yeah, Daniel responds to the guards coming to say, we're here to kill you, basically, with, like you said, a God-given wisdom and tact. So he's already using and relying on the resources he knows God has given. And by the way, notice how, well, as the proverb says, a kind word or I'm trying to remember the exact verbiage, but it's something like a kind word turns away wrath. That is to say, the way that Daniel responds, as God leads him, does in fact yield a different result than apparently a lot of the other wise men were able to get out of this. Whereas the other wise men throw up into a defensive mode. How can this possibly be? This is ridiculous. It's insane, which it is. But rather than going immediately to that, Daniel just asks questions, tactfully. What happened is leading the king to do this, which gives the assumption to the captain of the guard, the king no doubt has good reasons. I'd just like to know what they are. Notice Daniel then goes into the king and asks for time. So apparently the king is still so desperate to get the understanding of the dream. It's not that at this point he necessarily knows a lot about Daniel and cares greatly for Daniel's opinion. It's just at this point he wants a wise man to be able to do this. And so if one is going to come and approach him and ask, I think we can, just give us some time, the king is still willing to receive these same wise men he has already given an order to execute, if they can help him, because he's this troubled by them.
Whereas the others,
They didn't ask for time, did they?
what did they,
They just said this is impossible.
oh, they told him it's impossible.
Yeah, no one can do this. Daniel goes in, and it's also worth saying how he's still tactful here. He gives the king something that the king at least is willing to hear. He says, let's set a time where I will do what you say. And apparently, if that time comes and I can, then follow me. By the way, notice this also, as we'll see, helps all of the other wise men, because this means a stay of execution until that appointed time for all of the wise men, including Daniel and his friends. So Daniel's plea, tactful, it saves not only his life, but even though the wise men, as we will see later, are not necessarily appreciative of Daniel, he saves them, or God saves them through Daniel. Even though over and over again, the wise men are the ones who, and other peers of Daniel and his friends, constantly want to kill him down the road and his friends. But we'll get to that one. We'll cross that bridge and we'll get there. One more thing before we have to sign off. Just the way that, okay, first we have Daniel praying to God because of their need, and all of his friends, by the way, all the other three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are also there with Daniel, praying that God would give them this vision, or help them know. And then God gives it. And notice then Daniel responds to God with praise. This is, in fact, a very fundamental feature of the rhythm of worship itself. God acts on our behalf, and we respond in thanks, in praise, and obedience. That's a huge part of worship. And notice how he responds in praise. It's not just this effluence of, this is how you made me feel, God. I'm not saying there's no room for that. I'm just saying, look at how Daniel worships in his praise. He starts naming things about God that are objectively true. It's not about, here's how I'm feeling, God, and I just need to get this off my chest and tell you how much you mean to me. It's, God, I'm praising you because this is who you are. This is how you have acted, and I can only praise you rightly by speaking the truth about what you have done. That is to say, you changed the times and the seasons, on the one hand, and notice then he says, you set up kings and deposed them. Already acknowledging right here, you are bigger than King Nebuchadnezzar, who we're praying for you to deliver us from. And this will be, and as we'll see, there's a very big reason that Daniel prays this prayer, because as we'll see in the vision that he interprets, it's all about God raising up kings and deposing them. That is the meaning of the vision, as we'll see next week. Then he talks about how he's the source of all wisdom. He's the one who gives knowledge and discerning. He's the one who reveals what is hidden. We do not have knowledge or understanding or wisdom apart from him giving us, yes, the intellectual capacities to know this, but also the ability to discern and to understand anything. So again, I just want to point out to you this logic of worship, where Daniel acknowledges primarily God for who he is, and it's less about Daniel saying, this is how I feel toward you. I say this because this is a very big confusion in Christian worship among a lot of church bodies these days, where it becomes a big, I want to feel a certain way about God, and the worship service is designed to help me feel that way about God, so that I can then express my feelings about God. It's all really about me, how I'm going to be made to feel, what I feel, and how I express that to God. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for any of that. There are times where I get very swept up, very emotional in our worship services, even though some people think that there's no emotion in these things. But it's not to say that there won't be those responses, and that those aren't good and right and salutary things to have. It's just to say that the center of worship is God and his action. And so the way we Lutherans and a lot of other traditional worships are focused, if you pay attention to those versus a lot of contemporary worship, and by the way, I'm not against the kinds of contemporary worship where you have praise bands and all of that. It's about what's in the worship and how it flows. That becomes all about me. Whereas traditional worship tends to be, God, this is who you are. This is how you act. And I praise you for the glory you continually manifest through your law, through your gospel, through your saving acts, through everything you have done. I am now simply confessing my praise of you. I use the word confess deliberately because you know what the word confess means? Technically, say the same as. So when I confess my sins, I'm saying the same to God about what his law has said to me. His law says, you are a sinner, and so I confess, I agree with God. You are right, I am a sinner. When God forgives my sins, I confess my faith by saying, you are right, God. I am forgiven. I confess that Jesus is the Son of God because God has said, this is my holy Son. So you are right, I will say the same about it. I confess my praise, which is to say, God has done all of these praiseworthy things. I simply say the same as what God has said and done. Anyway, let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. We'll work through the bigger part of Daniel 2 next week.